Hey, this is Jake from Minimal Audio, and today I want to talk to you about when to use Fuse Compressor. So a couple weeks ago, we released our new plugin, Fuse Compressor, and it has been amazing to hear what you guys have made so far. But there's also been a little bit of confusion about when you shouldn't use Fuse Compressor. So we've seen people throw Fuse Compressor onto something like a master channel of, a band playing, expecting it to work more like a typical multi-band compressor. But the thing to remember with Fuse Compressor is that it has upward compression in the bands as well. And that upward compression is active by default. So if you want to use Fuse Compressor as a typical multi-band downward compressor, you need to disable the upward band compression. But before we talk about that, let's talk about some ways you do want to use Fuse Compressor. You do want to use Fuse Compressor on all of your individual instrument channels. And I don't mean all of them, but anything you want to sound crunchy or you want to fatten up or you want to get a little, more bulk into it, then Fuse Compressor is great on that individual channel. It doesn't matter if that channel is noisy or what's going on in it, as long as you have the ability to kind of hone in on that individual sound. So what are those things? Vocals, basses, guitars, drums, really anything that is a single sound source, right? We don't recommend Fuse Compressor as a mastering compressor. You can do amazing stuff with it. It's really, really responsive. It's awesome. You can use it however you like, but the default preset lends it to these applications. Cool, so let's take a look at some of those things we were just discussing. So I have this little loop I've made here in Ableton. I'll go ahead and play that now.
You gotta ride with me. 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 You gotta ride with me.
Overall, this is all compressed. It's sounding pretty good. What I wouldn't recommend is then just throwing Fuse Compressor on this master bus, right? So by default, you'll see what I was talking about is these ratios are set to 4:1 upwards by default. So just dropping this onto the master channel.
You gotta ride with me. You gotta ride with me. You gotta ride with me. You gotta ride with me.
I mean, we can easily make this work like a normal downward multiband, but we need to kind of adjust some stuff. So I'll go ahead and turn off the upward compression. I will bring up the downward ratio, the downward threshold, and now this should work much more like a regular multiband compressor. So we have 3 bands doing downward compression.
You gotta ride with me. You gotta ride with me. You gotta ride with me. You gotta ride with me.
So if you do want to use it like that, that's totally okay, but the one big thing to be aware of is you need to adjust these upward ratios by default in order to just get a transparent downward compression happening. Let's take a look at what it can do for the actual sounds we do want to use it on. So the first sound I used it on was this vocal. So I'll go ahead and play the vocal without Fuse Compressor.
You gotta ride with me. You gotta ride with me. You gotta ride with me. You gotta ride with me.
So you can hear it sounds okay. It's a nice little vocal recording, but it has those typical vocal recording issues, a little bit of buildup in the mids, a little not too crispy in the highs. And this is where Fuse Compressor can do wonders for us. So here's the Fuse Compressor patch I built for the vocals.
You gotta ride with me. You gotta ride with me. You gotta ride with me. You gotta ride with me.
Again, without it.
You gotta ride with me.
With it.
You gotta ride with me. You gotta ride with me. You gotta ride with me.
So you can hear a massive change in terms of taking that from a rough sounding vocal to very easily fitting it into the mix and making it sound like a nice present sound. So how did we do that with Fuse Compressor? It looks like we've got this 5-band preset and it's doing all sorts of stuff, but why don't we just build it from scratch ourselves again? Because it's pretty easy and quick with Fuse Compressor. So I'll drop Fuse Compressor on, and out of the gate we have...
You gotta ride with me. You gotta ride with me. You gotta ride.
All right, so already it's helping us a ton.
You gotta ride with me.
It's stabilized a lot of that boxiness. It's got a better high-end presence now, but let's go through and flip it to 5 bands and we can have some fun because, 5 bands seems like a lot to work with, but actually when you get into it, it's not too much work. So we already know we don't want sub from the vocals, so I'm just gonna zero that band out. Now, next band will be this one. So obviously we have the fundamental of the voice right there, so I'm gonna go ahead and nail in around that.
You gotta ride with me.
And now I have control over that really boxy part of it.
You gotta ride with me.
Right? So, but we want some of that, we just don't want too much of it.
You gotta ride with me.
Cool. So then next band, let's try this layer. I'm just going to squeeze it together and give it a solo.
You gotta ride with me.
Cool. I like that part.
You
That's
gotta ride with me.
where the character is starting to come from.
You gotta ride with me. You gotta ride with me.
Cool. And then we kind of have the lower highs here.
You gotta ride with me.
Cool. We can go ahead and squeeze those ones.
With me.
And I want that high end sizzle to come out strong. And now that I have all these bands soloed, I can really just kind of play with these more like EQs or volume sliders. So
You gonna ride with me? You gonna ride with me?
cool. So there you can see how easy it is to quickly dial in a bunch of different bands for a very complicated vocal spectrum and really get it under control and get it tuned and sound how you want it. So now that we've got that vocal dialed in, it can be fun to do a little extra processing. So I went ahead and turned on this cluster delay patch that has some built-in ducking into it.
You gonna ride with me? 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 You gonna ride with me?
Awesome. So another great place you can use Fuse Compressor, and we've covered this one already, is basses, of course. So here's this other bass patch that I've got going on in here, and we can listen to that without Fuse Compressor. Cool, so that's without Fuse Compressor, and then with Fuse Compressor. So this one's much more subtle than the vocal. Obviously, I just found this loop, and inside the loop is that kind of like really nice resonant wobble sound. And all I wanted to do was bring that out and make it more present. So I turned on Fuse Compressor and then isolated that in the band here. You can see as that wobble starts to get quiet, then the upward compression starts to bring it back in. Cool, and then bringing that melodic loop back in. The melodic loop, similar deal, not too much going on. So without Fuse Compressor. So you're gonna already hear this pad has a bunch of tie-in, didn't need too much, but I just threw it on just for fun, just to see what we could do. And it was able to bring a little bit more of the body and the mids out and actually bring some of that high out of the pad. I actually wanted, instead of boosting the highs with this instance of Fuse Compressor, I actually used it to kind of remove some of it. But still nice and stable. Cool, so I hope that gives you guys a good overview of how to use Fuse Compressor, when to use Fuse Compressor, why to use Fuse Compressor, and that, maybe you learned something along the way as well. Cool. Have a good day.